Do you ever come across one of those books that essentially sets the bar for any other personal development book you could possibly read? Well, today I have the book for you guys. Now, my name is Marcus. This is Discover Ignite, where we discover possibilities and ignite change. And today I'm actually doing a book review for you guys on The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And if you haven't read this book, man, I'm telling you, you need to go pick up this book right now. So as I said, this is one of those books that if you haven't read, you're gonna wanna go pick it up right now. Like, no doubt, like, this is the book that sets the bar for all other personal development books. And for good reason, right? Because this book, now getting into personal development, right? I wanna kinda set a little presets here. Getting into personal development a couple of years back, this is one of the first books I picked up, right? This is one of the books, when you look for a personal development book, this has gotta be like in the top 3 books, right? And for good reason, because this book essentially, you know, teaches you a lot. Now, when you hear the title, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you're kind of like, that's probably one of those books that just talks about habits. You know, I already know about all the good habits you should have, the bad habits, blah, blah, blah. But the case is, right, is that this book is nothing like that. This book talks about some really good things. It talks about different quadrants, right? And how we deal with our time and what we think is essentially critical, that it's not very important, right? And it talks about these 4 different quadrants and where we typically like to be in, and what the quadrants that you do want to be in, right? To be successful in life and not be that person that's just, you know, trying to extinguish fires that really don't even matter, right? And one of the best things I've always loved about this book, now again, I've read this book many years ago and I tried to read it every year, right? And it's one of those books that you have to read all the time because it's got such great, valuable information. And it's one of those books that have tons of gold nuggets in it, right? And so this book, right, especially for like me, having kids, right, it has a lot of examples, right, when dealing with things and dealing with people, dealing with situations, right? And he particularly talks about his kids in a lot of examples and how he tries to deal with his emotions, right? Now, when his kid may be acting up, throwing a tantrum, and he's trying to teach his essentially daughter, right, how to share, right? It was on a birthday party and she didn't want to share her brand new toys, right? And he talks about, you know, the way he reacted, right? He went over there and said, hey, no, you need to share. And she wouldn't share. So he essentially, you know, became forceful and he grabbed the toy out of her hand and he gave it to their friend. And then he later reflected on that and essentially said, well, you know, what you really need to be doing here is not be like that, right? You have to get an understanding of what the other person is doing, right? And allow his daughter to have ownership of those new things that she has. And she hasn't been able to get in that state, right, where she felt like she had ownership and essentially would be willing to share after that, right? And this is something, when you have young kids, right, it's like, you know, that makes sense. You try to get into their head, you know, they don't have this crazy logic like we think they do have, right? All that stuff is still building up at young kids' ages. And so it was good to see those kind of examples, right? Now, these examples, you know, I'm talking about kids, but they can be applied to everyday life, can be applied to, you know, different situations, different relationships. And I think that's what's extremely important, is it talks about a bunch of different, you know, things and gives great examples in it about life and being successful, right? It's not just about, you know, being successful in business. Yes, it does talk about business aspects. It does talk about relationships, right? It's very heavy on those types of things in the book, and it's great to see that, right? And reading this book, it really gets you to rethink. It really puts you to, you know, reframe a lot of different situations in which you're in, and try to do that to your best ability, right? And it's something that you can't just essentially, you know, get overnight, right? It's not something that's going to happen like that. So you essentially have to practice this reframing and understand that you need to be more self-aware of what's going on and try to get a different perspective, right? Don't just rush into it with your perspective and try to, you know, essentially solve the solution instead of trying to get an overall grasp of everything before you try to essentially solve the solution, right? And so this book is great for that. Again, this is one of those personal development books that's always at the top, right? No matter what list you see, this is the book that's there. As far as like any cons to this book, I would say there is none, right? This is one of the first books I did read when I first started getting into personal development. And again, it set the bar. right? It was one of those books. I haven't really read a book that has come essentially up to that standard. There's a couple that come up to that standard, and I try to share those books as much as possible, but this book, you know, was one of those top-notch books that essentially set that bar. And again, there would be no cons of that book because of that fact. Now again, if you haven't read this book, I will actually leave it down in the description. And if you guys enjoyed this video, remember to hit that like button on the way out. Until next time, I will see you guys later.